Hello and welcome to another edition of Radio Hermetica on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Andy Mercer, and tonight I'm talking to a chap I've got to know quite well. We've met up a few times. He is the owner of Aeon Sophia Press, who is the publisher of my first two books, Liber Coronzon on the Enochian Magic of Dr. John Dee, and Runum, Wisdom of the Runes on the Armories of Guido von List. He is also himself a practicing occultist, and I thought we'd make an interesting conversation this evening with my friend Johan. So, Johan, the first question I want to ask you, which it seems a bit crazy considering I've known you for quite a while now, how do you pronounce your surname?
My surname? It's Boomsma.
Boomsma. I was never quite sure.
Yeah, it's actually a typical Dutch name. I think it has roots in Scandinavian because my first name, Johan, is of course also Northern Europe, Scandinavian type name. Mm-hmm. My first name, but more my last name is more common in the northern regions of Netherlands.
Like say, I've always tried variations again pronunciation, but I've never been quite sure. Yes, tell me. I mean, I mentioned a little bit about you, sort of you're a publisher, etc. But tell me more about yourself. How did you first get interested in the occult?
Well, it started actually from a very young age. From my mother's side, my parents are Catholic, so in a sense, I'm brought up in a Catholic Christian kind of way, but my parents decided not to do the baptism when I was a baby, so I did my baptism and a few other stuff what comes along with it on a much later age, when I was 12. And during that time, I think I went to do all these things for the wrong reasons. As a child, you only think about presents and not really about the spiritual meaning. So in a little bit later age, when I was, I think, 14, 15 years old, I very much got in touch with music and with with punk, hardcore, metal music. And at the same time, I was also a little bit starting to search spiritually what means Christianity and Catholicism for me. And I found out on an early age that Christianity was not my path. So I soon started to be more politically involved, becoming more into music, but also start to think, what does spirituality mean for me? And I slowly got into, when I was, I think, 16 or 17, I got into the punk hardcore music, and a specific division of that is the straight edge hardcore, which means that a person is politically aware, no drugs, no alcohol, I'm a vegetarian. And in that same time, I also got interested in Krishna consciousness, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And from there, I developed more into esoteric, occult kind of topics.
That's one of the things that what we realised a while back that we shared in common. We both had an interest, particularly in the Krishna consciousness stuff. I will never call myself a devotee or anything like that, but I certainly had a strong and abiding interest, and I always thought it was quite funny considering our interests now that we both came through that kind of route. How did you get involved? Were you particularly involved with Krishna consciousness, or was it more on a personal thing for you?
It was more a personal thing, but I also got into Krishna consciousness because of the music I was into, and also the mindset at that time, what I was into, and actually I still am. I was very much, and still am, into healthy food, into spiritual things, and Krishna consciousness appealed to me because it has a more practical approach. And when I was in my most active moments in Krishna consciousness, I did the chanting of the the Hare Krishna mantra, on the 108 Krishna Yapa malas. So I did a lot of those rituals, and by doing those rituals, I got more in touch with the idea that doing the rituals, that it has an effect on both a material platform but also on a spiritual platform. And I also got slowly more in touch with witchcraft and magic, and reading about Thelema and Aleister Crowley. And from there, I got to learn about Osman Spare. And so Krishna consciousness became a little bit in the background, but the idea of doing a ritual and what the ritual is for, and doing a weekly food offering, stuff like that, got me more and more interested in a broader field or range of what a ritual means to me, and and what magic or occult rituals means to me.
There's definitely a kind of connection, isn't there? I too have used the Maha Mantra, as they call it, for not so much again now, but for a while I did, because it had a real settling effect on the mind. And it's interesting because once you really get into that rhythm of the chanting, the Hare Krishna chant, you do get lost in it. It's it does kind of take over your mind for a while, and you kind of just forget about what's going on around you. Because I think people tend to think of Krishna consciousness, they see the guys in the orange robes with the head shaved, a little bit ponytail at the back, dancing around the streets, singing, what have you, and think it looks a bit ridiculous. If you're a fan of the game, you as in the audience are a fan of the game Grand Theft Auto, I think it is, you can win points by running over Krishna's consciousness people, which is quite unpleasant. But it misses the really important stuff, that it is a way of communicating with something perhaps higher within ourselves, or is out there. I mean, I want to look at it, and it can take you away from the ordinary mundane stuff. And it's, as you say, it kind of leads you into other practices that involve chanting and ritual that can really empower you. So I just always was quite intrigued that we both had followed that path at some point, long before we even knew each other.
And what is very interesting, of course, especially with the Maha Mantra, is because it all has to do with the sound vibration, and specifically the words. It is not only a philosophical and spiritual meaning, but it also has to do with the sound vibration, which brings a more, hidden energies into motion. And I think that in that sense, it draws a little bit parallels with a magical invocation and saying specific words of power to awaken hidden energies.
Absolutely. Talking about hidden energies, what is your kind of area now that you find most interesting? What has been your own journey, Percy's, from sort of the Krishna stuff onwards? What particularly has captured your imagination and felt connected with?
I must say, until this day, I'm still into Krishna consciousness. It's still a very important aspect in my life, in my practice, and also in my spiritual ideas. But also, I would say I'm into Luciferian Satanism, and especially I'm interested in aspects of Sophia being an entity of wisdom who makes the transformation into Lucifer. And I always saw those types of parallels between the feminine spiritual entity of wisdom into Lucifer as the light bearer of wisdom. And I always see it as something similar to Krishna consciousness, especially with Krishna, who is also a dark, complex type of deity, and Lucifer or Satan being a dark type of deity.
So it's a for those who don't know a lot about this kind of world, it will seem like a very strange sort of gear shift from Krishna, who people think of guys in orange robes, to talk about Lucifer and Satan. Would you be able to go into a bit more detail about how you see those two connecting? We've talked about it before on my conference last year. Briefly, we talked about this subject. But would you like to go into a bit more detail about how you see that connection, how they work together? Because it's fascinating, I think.
Well, the thing is, what people, I think, most of the time forget is that Krishna, in essence, is giving guidance to Arjuna. And as you know, the Bhagavad Gita, the most important book in Krishna consciousness, it's a story about a battlefield between two important families who are in a dispute with each other. And the prince Arjuna is going to the battlefield on his wagon with the horse. And Krishna is the chauffeur on that wagon. And during the fight on the battlefield, Arjuna is asking Krishna specific questions about how to kill someone else, what does it mean, what will happen with the soul. And Krishna answers Arjuna in a way that I think is very satanic and Luciferian, because he is saying, okay, you have to own up to your responsibilities. You have to act and not only think about it, but you also have to understand what your place is in this material world, but also what is the effect in a spiritual sense. And I think what Arjuna is doing in his profession as a warrior is doing exactly that, what is in my idea an act of Satanism. Mm-hmm. He's not walking away from it. And Krishna, in this sense, is guiding and teaching Arjuna about it. And I see Krishna as Lucifer in that sense. Mm. As bringer of the knowledge, as being the teacher, and being a guidance for someone who is preparing himself or herself into moving on to doing a satanic act, which in this case is warfare or whatever it can be.
Yeah, I can certainly concur with a lot of what you're saying. That is the idea of opening the mind to the knowledge that is available, to seek knowledge rather than simply obeying for the sake of obeying. As you say, on the battlefield, it's do we just go on to this war, do we fight this battle, or is it, why am I doing this? What is the point behind this? Is there a reason for it? And as you say, Krishna then elaborates upon that in the Gita quite succinctly. And I personally, I've read it, I don't know how many times, it's absolutely fascinating. Again, although the actual Gita itself is relatively short, it's very short, really. There are so many different versions, if you like, of what's what I'm looking for, commentaries. Lots of commentaries. I mean, the actual Krishna consciousness' own commentary is pretty huge, but there are others that are of a similar kind of volume, isn't there? You'd have like 5 lines of text, and then you've got 10 pages of explanation afterwards. It's quite amazing how much information is packed into that relatively short piece of prose poetry, really. Because it's often, I know, done properly. It's sung, isn't it, rather than simply said.
Correct. I think those explanations are really, really important, because if we talk about Luciferian Satanism, and if I compare it with the Bhagavad Gita, of course, Satanism or Luciferian Satanism is a completely different path. But I do think there's a lot of similarities between both, because they both are focusing on obtaining knowledge, and especially knowledge that helps you grow spiritually, and that no matter what kind of things you do as a human, if you do it in a sense that that you keep the spiritual aspects and consequences in the top of your mind, then your whatever you do, whatever crimes or whatever, in this case, killing another human being on the battlefield, whatever you may do, it's still, if you focus on the spiritual aspect, then whatever you do materially, it will have a different kind of, a different kind of meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not explaining this correctly, but...
No, I think you're following. I mean, not suggesting you go and murder somebody and feel spiritual about it, but they understand the idea.
Words a bit there.
Yeah. I say, don't worry, I can all do some editing later if you're not sure about something you've said. We can always sort that out. But say, it's more the idea of the spiritual significance of every action, every detail of what we're doing can be read that way. It's not simply just doing it for the sake of things. Although, of course, one of the things that Krishna does talk about is the idea of doing things because they're there to be done and don't necessarily do it for any kind of great reward. Yeah. Which is, again, is an important thing. It's a sense of duty to do these things, which I think is an important message these days.
Yeah, correct. Arjuna cannot walk away from his duties. He must go on and fight the fight on this battlefield. And Krishna is guiding Arjuna to fight this fight not out of hatred or anger against the enemy, but actually helping the enemy become also, spiritually enlightened. And so the act of Arjuna going to war is actually, he's actually doing some type of spiritual work for his opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, I follow exactly what you're saying and certainly agree with your interpretation. A couple of questions I'd like to ask you, though. You've used the term Luciferian and Satanism and Satan interchangeably, but how would you define those terms, just so people are clear? Because unfortunately, obviously, a lot of people tend to get the idea of Satan, the first thing they think of sort of goat sacrificing, blood rituals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not really what we're talking about here at all. But, I mean, how would you define those terms?
I must say I sometimes struggle a little bit with those terms, but on the other hand, I see Satan and Lucifer as one and the same. But as you know, in for example, Hinduism and also in Krishna consciousness, the same spiritual entity or deity takes on a different form, shape, and meaning in a different environment and setting. So in some settings, it's more appropriate to use the term Lucifer, and in some other settings, it's more fitting to use the words or term Satan. And sometimes in a different setting, the term Luciferian Satanism is more fitting. But all those terms, in my opinion, mean a little bit the same. It's about the same source or about the same entity or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me, certainly. Just moving on a little bit, of course, one of the things and the reasons why I know you is that you're a publisher, which is what I mentioned at the introduction.
Yes.
What made you decide to get into publishing? I mean, it's an interesting thing to certainly adventure into. What was the driving force, if you like?
Well, of course, I started reading a lot of religious and esoteric books, and slowly I became interested in a more niche topics when it comes to topics like Satanism and witchcraft, and I wanted to learn and understand more, and I couldn't always find the books that I wanted to see and wanted to read, and so I started to think, okay, maybe I should start my own company and also be there for beginning unpublished authors to let their voices heard, and to work with talented authors who are not yet who are being overlooked maybe, or who are not yet published but still their work is very powerful to me personally. So I prefer to only publish books that I find interesting, and I don't look at it if it's interesting for someone else.
Okay, so Really, the question would be is, how do you actually go about doing it? I mean, obviously I don't want you to give away any trade secrets here, but how did you actually go from the idea of, I quite like the idea of being a publisher, producing the books that I think of writers who deserve a publicity to be out there, to actually doing it, setting it all up? What did it really involve?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. What did you have to do to actually get it all together to start publishing? What did it take? What was the way you went about it?
Well, what I started was with, I took approximately a year or 1.5 years before the first book was physically being released. I started out with creating an audience. So, as you know, Facebook or Instagram, social media is very important, especially for small independent companies like occult book publishers. And what I started was with building an audience, and each week I would post a message telling, okay, I'm now doing this, I'm writing the business plan, I'm now writing the financial plan, I'm now contacting book printers, I'm now receiving my first manuscripts. From there, make a selection which one will be published first. And because in the same time period of 1 year or 1.5 years, slowly building an audience, at the moment that I was working on the first product, the first book to be released, I already had an audience to show what I have created, because they also went with me on that journey, seeing the company become what it is now. And when the first book was released, I immediately sold a few copies, and that was the first start.
Excellent. What was that first book?
The first book was a book by Erica Alve, if I pronounce her name correctly. And she written a fiction book called Blood from Heaven. And she is also a high priestess from Thelema type temple.
That's an interesting choice, a fiction, a novel, as it were, for the first title. I didn't realise that. I know you've had early on published a couple of fictional works, but I didn't realise the very first was a fictional book. What was the reception? How did it go? Was it successful?
Well, it didn't work that well. I only printed 50 copies, and all those copies were sold quickly. But I must say the quality of the writing, it was not yet at the level where we wanted to be. But what was for me very important to publish that book was also, I think the most important aspect was the personal contact I had with this author. And I felt it was right to publish her book because of the personal contact we had. And from there, I thought it was a good thing to do, to publish her book. And that's how we started. Excellent. I think it had more to do with the personal relation, I think, than in terms of, is it a good book and am I able to sell it?
Right. So, what came next? What was the next title that you produced? I'm assuming it's always been under the same name, which we'll get into the name of your publishing company a bit later on, because I think it's a fascinating story there. But it's always been that name. So, what was the next book that came out?
I think out of my head, it was with Edgar Kerval from Colombia, and the first book was Klipoth Opus 1 Esoteric Journal.
Excellent.
And he contacted me to ask, okay, hey, I created this magazine, and would you like to publish it? And so it was the second opportunity to release something, and with Edgar, he was doing this magazine together with another very interesting person, and that's Robert Dalla Valle. He's from America, and Edgar and Robert, they were together doing this first clip of Opus One, and so yeah, we agreed on publishing the first opus, and that was in June, I think, and we created a softcover magazine of. The first print was 111 copies, and it came with a CD. And that one was sold out in, I think, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks or less.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's the kind of start you want to sort of hit the ground running with something like that. What was on the CD?
The CD was music from Edgar's musical projects.
Was it the dark ambient style that I know?
Yeah, it was really nice. Beautiful music.
I'm a bit of a fan of dark ambient. In fact, the audience to this show know that the introduction music rather to this show is by a German pair called Herbst 9, and it's they gave their permission for me to use it, and you'll get to hear it yourself, obviously, when you hear the show, and if you've heard other shows, you've heard the music before. It's really is that dark ambient stuff that I absolutely love, and I've got my own YouTube channel, which I promote dark ambient artists by doing little continuous mix compilations, and I've done one of Edgar's MAR project as well, and that's out.
It's beautiful work indeed. Yeah,
definitely good stuff. So, what would you say was the biggest challenge you've faced being a publisher, being a small independent publisher?
The biggest challenge, I think, still is I think one is exposure. It's very difficult to create a decent exposure, and so becoming well known. And I think another thing is, especially when there are no banks who are willing to give you a huge loan, a huge bag of money, and say, okay, I'm interested in your company, let's do it. Books are, in essence, not a very popular product for banks to invest their money in. So the second thing, I think, is the financial aspect. It's very difficult. It's very expensive. And that combined with very limited exposure makes it difficult to sell the books in the quantity you want.
I mean, Facebook have faced a lot of criticism in the last few months, particularly with revelations about hacking and giving away people's details. But I think one of the good things it's done, it's made things like small publishing companies have a platform to advertise and to become known on. If it wasn't for those, it would be next to impossible really to get yourself out there as a small publisher, because it's difficult getting shops to take books, and as we both know, the margins can be quite small when you were printing.
Yeah.
Costs have come out, that when you sell to shops you're losing even more money, so you're producing very little revenue from a book sale via a shop. So to be able to sell directly to the public thanks to things like Facebook is really invaluable, isn't it? It's made it possible. And as you say earlier on, there are some great writers out there who don't get any kind of exposure because there's just it doesn't seem to be the medium or platform for them to become known, and people like yourself are offering that opportunity is fantastic. So I mean, what would you say was, if there was one in particular, the book or books that you're most proud of, if you like, you've managed to really get out there? Is there anything that particularly comes to mind?
I think it would be a book, and that's the second book I had published. It's by Patrick John Larrabee, and the book is Whisperings from the Void. And I think it appeals a lot to me on many different levels. It draws, I think, inspiration from Austin Spare, maybe a little bit of Andrew Chumley. It has aspects of witchcraft, and he touches upon a few spiritual, occult deities. I think his book is a very good mix of a lot of different things, combined with art, with the sigils, and his whole writing style I think, is very unique. His way of using words and creating sentences is, I think it's one of the most beautiful books I have been able to release. Yeah,
Definitely agree. I should.
But there are more of favorites, but I think Whisperings from the Void is by far one of the most beautiful books I've ever been able to publish today. Yeah.
Excellent. I must admit, I've got to know Patrick reasonably well through good old Facebook, and I should try and get him on my show. Actually, you could do an interview with Patrick one of these days. That would make a fascinating guest, I think, definitely. The other thing I wanted to talk about, of course, is that you are not just a publisher. You yourself have written a few books that you've obviously brought out for your own company, which is understandable. And I've got copies of them myself. Can you tell me more about the books that you've written?
Yeah, the books I've written. The first book I did was Grimoire of Bhakti Yoga, and the second book is called Psalterium Satanas, and both books are compilations of my own ritual sketchbooks and notebooks. And what can I say? The Grimoire of Bhakti Yoga is my first attempt. It's very small, but it's a very practical grimoire. It's more like, it's not really a book for reading. I think it's really a book to put to use. And it's created in a way that I think everyone can use it in their own type of practice. It doesn't matter which background or which occult path you are traveling upon. I think the Grimoire of Bhakti Yoga is a book that focuses on devotional service, and that was the first book I written. Psalterium Satanas is, I think, a slightly better written book, and I think also more a focused book. It's a better version of the Grimoire of Bhakti Yoga. I think the text in Psalterium Satanas is even more devotional. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I started to write those books, and like I say, it's all compiled out of my notebooks. I have probably around 10, 20 small notebooks. They're full of text and sigils and ways to do things, and most of the things are important to me personally, and because of that, I decided not to publish everything, and that's why both books are relatively thin in paper count, page count. I mean, because I think that I can reveal more, but it wouldn't make so much sense to someone else, because it's important for me. I written it down in the moment I was doing it, and to reveal more, it makes maybe no sense to someone else.
I think it's quite, in a sense, a brave thing to reveal one's own personal workings, because, it opens you up to the possibility of other people seeing your mindset, your thinking. And I do think it certainly takes a bit of nerve, if you like, to publish your own personal workings. I mean, we are going to talk a bit about my books a bit later on, but particularly I've included some of my own work in my books that you published. But what you've done is very personal, and I think it's really your own personal ritual work, and it takes a brave man to be able to step out and say, well, this is what I do myself, because it opens up to other people to think, well, I don't like that, or whatever, you know what I mean? It takes a bit of guts to do that, and I admire you for doing that, because it is very much a personal thing that you've done there. So what are you working on at the moment? You got any future books planning to produce yourself?
I'm actually writing a book, or I'm trying to write a book that's a topic I touched upon in my book Psalterium Satanas. It's a theological term called kenosis. Kenosis, right? I will try to explain the topic of kenosis. Specifically, it's about the one moment that Jesus Christ reveals himself to mankind. And from a theological perspective, it is seen that Jesus at that moment is both human but also godly or divine. But from my perspective, being a Luciferian Satanism, I think that Jesus commits a crime, or he's doing something what is illogic, because from the moment he gives up all his divine attributes, he is not a god anymore, but he became man. And which, in my perspective, also with my Buddhist and Hinduist background, is he is going from a divine God being status, transforming himself into a material, into the material body. And as you know, in Buddhism, you want to reincarnate into each material body until you don't have to incarnate into a material body anymore, and you go up into nirvana. And by the act of kenosis, Jesus Christ is doing the other way around, and he's therefore becoming entangled in the wheel of samsara, which is the wheel of birth, growing up, old age, sickness, and death. And he's willingly seeking to position himself into that wheel of samsara. And because of that, he disqualifies himself as being divine or being a god. And I'm trying to write a book about this specific topic, what is in the essence of what I believe is Luciferian Satanism.
That's absolutely fascinating, and we, as I said, we did talk briefly about this last year when we met up at our conference, and I said that sounds like a really interesting book, and I'm quite looking forward to have a read of that myself when it's complete, definitely. I just want to go back a little bit to something we were talking about very briefly just now about Bhakti Yoga, because I think it's interesting to point out that most people think of yoga, they think of people sitting on the floor, bending themselves in the funny positions, doing the downward dog, etc., etc. But of course, there's actually 4 forms of yoga, and that's Hatha Yoga, or Hatha Yoga, the bending of the limbs and doing all sorts of strange things to yourself. But Bhakti Yoga is something different. I wonder if you'd like to explain yourself what Bhakti Yoga actually is.
Well, Bhakti Yoga, in essence, is a very practical ritual. Bhakti Yoga is doing everything in the service of God, or in the service of Lord, or in the service of whatever deity or whatever spiritual path you're doing. So just like Arjuna on the battlefield, being a warrior is also Bhakti Yoga. He is doing something not in the with the focus in his mind motivated by hatred, but he is performing the acts of violence because of Bhakti Yoga. He's doing it in the service of the Lord, and because of that, his practice of being a warrior becomes something spiritual. And he has not hatred towards his enemy in his mind. He has only in his mind to do this to evolve from the material plane until the spiritual plane. And Bhakti Yoga, you can do it in any type of ritual. You can start with weekly food offerings. You can start with the Maha Mantra, or whichever kind of type of ritual, with the focus on, in my case, on Krishna or Lucifer. So Bhakti Yoga is in my opinion, a very intimate type of practice of love and connection and appreciation and cultivating that spiritual bond.
Mm-hmm. It is that essence of divine devotion, isn't it? The idea of the Krishna consciousness movement is the idea that every act is sort of in recognition of the divinity of Krishna and your connection with that. Just to quickly go through the other two for our listeners, the other two forms of yoga are karma yoga, which is to do with obviously karma, which I think most people understand the idea of give and take karma, whether you're trying to work through the karmic you've built up according to Hindu mysticism. And the last one,
the Raja Yoga.
Thank you, Raja Yoga, the royal path. It's the sort of the path of pure knowledge and wisdom, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's Raja Yoga is the fourth one, which is the path of knowledge and wisdom and study. And in a sense, I think as a writer, you're kind of covering both of those, because of course we are talking about Raja, which is the knowledge. So obviously, as a writer, you're giving knowledge and information, which is opposed to the notion of pure faith. So it's kind of following both paths, which is an interesting way of looking at it. That when you write, you are passing on knowledge and wisdom. And if you're writing a book that passes on the knowledge and wisdom of bhakti yoga, of devotion, you're still on the Raja Yoga path as well, because you're given that information that you can work this way. So who would you say were the writers who've most inspired you, that really given you ideas and sort of moved you forward in your own thinking?
Yes, I think a very important book for me is Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha.
Ah.
And also Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf. And I think that, in some aspects, Goethe was important. A few books of Austin Osman Spare was important to me, but obviously the Bhagavad Gita. But I think, Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha is one of the most important books, I think, ever.
Would you be able to tell us a bit more about that book for those who aren't familiar with it?
All right. The Siddhartha book is about a young monk. He's a son of a Brahman, a very important, let's say, Hindu priest. And at one point, the young boy, he decides to move out of his parents' house and search for his own spiritual path. And he takes his friend with him, and together they go on a journey. And during their life, they become members of different esoteric groups, or where they learn different types of yoga. And along the way, his friend, he becomes interested in Buddhism and decides to become a devotee of this spiritual leader. While Siddhartha, he has second thoughts. He is thinking, well, this is not for me. I'm going to move along and going on my own spiritual journey. And what I think is interesting about Siddhartha is because he's trying to find his spiritual enlightenment in his own ideas and in his own way of doing things. And because he is doing that, he is also more in defiance of how things are presented to him. That like the rules of engagement in certain types of religions or spiritual guidelines. And I think Siddhartha is a very interesting spiritual book. And I think if you are interested in both witchcraft but also into spiritual development, I think that Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha is explaining and showing all these things in that book.
I think it's probably a bit of a surprise to those listening who wouldn't necessarily have expected you to have chosen that as a particular book or a particular author, but for the way you've explained it, it makes absolute perfect sense. Again,
well, you should not forget that maybe the book Siddhartha was not originally the idea to present it in the way how I interpreted this book. So what I'm explaining is how I see the message, how it is presented to me, how I feel that Siddhartha, as the main character in this story, is doing the things. Yeah, that was very inspiring. Not to forget, Hermann Hesse was, of course, a brilliant writer And his book Steppenwolf is also, again, one of the most important literary works until today. Yeah.
Actually, that was going to be my next question. Would you like to elaborate a bit more on Steppenwolf, what it's actually about, and how you've read it, how you see it?
Well, it's been a while that I read Steppenwolf. So what I remember is Steppenwolf is about a man who is physically living and going through the motions of all mundane life, but he is also a little bit an outsider, maybe an outlaw, and he is seeing humanity more as brainless puppets who are just doing things to get attention or recognition or whatever. And the main character in this book is observing all these things that the world is showing to him, but he also sees the humor and the irony of all these useless practices that humanity is doing. So yeah, I think the main character in Steppenwolf is something that made a very important impact on my own way of thinking and seeing and judging the world out there.
I say it's interesting that you would choose books like that rather than, I suppose, many people might have expected an esoteric publisher to talk about something that was much more esoteric, sort of, I don't know, a Crowley text or something like that. But no, it's absolutely brilliant that it's something different to what you might have necessarily expected. So, coming back to the question of the company itself, Aeon Sophia Press, how did you come by that name? What is its significance to you? I know you briefly touched on that earlier on, but do you want to go into a bit more detail?
Yeah, I will give you. I will try to give you the short explanation a little bit. The name Aeon Sophia Press is a little bit born out of the word Aeon. It's like an age. It's a time or a period in time or in history. So like the Iron Age or the whatever type of age. Mm-hmm. Aeon is also an age, which is now like the Kali Yuga. The only difference is with my books, I will try to bring wisdom or knowledge into this age of Kali Yuga. And that's why the name Aeon Sophia Press is like a beacon of light, of knowledge. So yeah, that's a little bit the name, yeah.
So fascinating, the connection you mentioned earlier on between Sophia and Lucifer. That's particularly interesting. You mentioned a bit more about that.
Yes, I was also, but now I'm talking about something that's a long time ago, very interested in works of Steiner, and what he is talking about. But not only him, but Lucifer and Sophia. Sophia as a feminine spiritual entity, she decides to transform herself into a masculine spiritual entity. And by doing so, Sophia descends into the human body and through the senses, it enables humanity to acquire knowledge. Mm. And in that status, Sophia becomes the more material being Lucifer. So Sophia is the spiritual entity and Lucifer a more material type of spiritual entity, while in the position of Lucifer, humanity is able to acquire knowledge and moving away from the status of enslavement and the status of ignorance.
Excellent. So just touch back on something you mentioned briefly, the idea of the Kali Yuga. Would you want to explain that?
Yeah, the Kali Yuga is in Krishna consciousness and in Hinduism is the current age. The Kali Yuga is the age of decay. It's the age of materialism, and in the Kali Yuga, all the aspects of being focused on short-term things, on materialism, on illusion. These are all, essences or aspects of the Kali Yuga. So it is important for the Luciferian Satanism to move away from the cycle of illusion and acquire wisdom and knowledge, and focus more on something durable, on something infinite.
Absolutely. It's an interesting point that in Krishna consciousness and Hinduism, the Kali Yuga began some time ago, long before the material world that we're living in today. And it's almost like they were pretty much got it spot on, exactly what the world's become, haven't they? It's yes. Interesting that there's no, I mean, at the time the Kali Yuga began would be, I'm trying to remember now, it would some time ago, long before the modern world is as it is. And yet it seems to have been quite correct in its assumption of where we were going and how we do need to break out of it. And hopefully some of the stuff that publishers like yourself do, trying to be more spiritual in this very materialistic world, is doing a little bit to move us in that right direction, hopefully. So, what are your future plans? Have you got anything big on the horizon that you're working on, or is there anything that we should look out for?
Yes, in terms of publishing books, there's a lot going on. Our author, Matthew Whiteman, is working on a very big book series. And for the next month, we have the volume number 3 and number 4 coming out of his book series. Then we have the author, Mr. Kirkbride, who wrote Into the Void and Saturn Rising. He is now working together with Matthew Whiteman of the book series on a small book that's called the Akeldama Dialogues. And it's... the book will be some type of conversation between both of them, and they're both explaining aspects of their field of expertise. And hopefully that will be released next month. Then we have a follow-up of Saturn Rising Volume 2. Then there is, I think, 2 large books of a writer called Gilles de Laval. He's the author of Sacerdotium Umbrae Mortis, Sefer Yeroch Ruachot, and Black Magic Evocation of the Shamha Mevorach. Mm-hmm. What's more going on? Our author Michael Idehal, we are going to do a reprint of his book Pyramidox. I believe we have a book forthcoming of you about aspects of Shiva. What's more going on? A few reprints. Patrick Larrabee is working on a brand new book. Yeah, there's a lot going on, actually.
Absolutely.
Too much, maybe.
No. It's good to keep yourself busy with that.
Each week, adjusting and creating a new publication schedule for the year 2018. And with all these new books and reprints being produced, some of the titles will be pushed back into 2019. And it's a little bit trying to find out when which book is best to publish. Mm-hmm. Also, I cannot publish too many books in a too short time period, or else my customers are unable to keep up with all the new releases.
That's quite true, actually. You've got to keep these things kind of balanced and what's the word I'm looking for? Right. Keep it a steady flow, I think is probably the best way to put it, certainly. I would just briefly mention there, because I think it might be interesting, is the Shiva book kind of follows on and connects with what you've written yourself, your Bhakti Yoga ones there, because obviously there's the Shiva Krishna combinational links that unavoidable, because it's all to do with Hinduism and Hindu mythology. So it's not a million miles away from what you've done, but this is more based around Shiva or Kashmir Shaivism, to be more accurate, that particular branch of Shiva worship, which is a universal oneness, but like the Brahman idea from sort of the heart of Hinduism.
Yes.
I hopefully will have that to you sometime soon, not in the immediate future. I must admit, it's a little bit slow on that one. There are other things which I've been working on, which we know about, and but it will be with you before the end of the year. That is the plan, certainly.
I'm very what we talked about earlier. I'm very much looking forward to publish that book. And like I said before, when I started with Aeon Sophia Press, I'm mainly interested in to publish books that I find myself interesting. And obviously, I wouldn't know if someone else is also interested, but I think that generally my readership of Aeon Sophia Press will be very surprised and impressed by your Shiva book, of course. And I think it's interesting to publish books what people don't expect. I don't want to publish the next book on doing whatever type of rituals. I'm not so much interested in the more common things you see being put forth about the Qliphoth or Kabbalah or witchcraft in general. I think a book like the Shiva book of yours, will give a different and new kind of flavor added to what's already being published at this moment.
Well, hopefully, certainly. I mean, it's a bit of a departure from the Liber Coronzom and my Runan book, of course, which are the two you published, I mentioned back at the beginning. And so hopefully people will find that interesting. Well, we're almost out of time. It's been absolutely fascinating afternoon talking to you, Johan. It's great we've had the chance to talk again.
I hope it makes a little bit sense. It's very difficult for me to explain in English what I really want to say. So I hope it makes sense a little bit. Yeah,
absolutely. As I've often said to you, mate, your English is better than you think it is. It's pretty good. It's pretty easy to follow. But I'm just going to wrap it up tonight. This has been an excellent evening talking to my friend Johan, who's my publisher on my first two books as well. And hopefully there'll be more coming from you. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they either want to send you a manuscript or want to just keep up to date with what's coming out? What's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, the best way to contact me is via our email, aeonsophiapress@gmail.com, or just contact me via the public Facebook page. I usually respond to messages within a few hours, so I'm always there if people have questions. And yeah, when it comes to manuscripts, send me something good, because out of the 10 manuscripts, 9 are rejected. Yeah, it's very difficult to find works that we can publish. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's got to be, as you say, coherent, complete, and actually make sense. I can imagine that we probably get some pretty strange stuff sent to you. Well, I have to wrap it up now. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, Johan, and hopefully we'll hear more from you and your books in the future. Well, this has been me, as always, with Radio Hermetica, and I'm just going to say good night for everybody, and I will have another show for you next month, as usual. I haven't a clue what it's going to be about. That'll be something I'll work out during the intervening time. But thank you very much for listening to Radio Hermetica, and I hope you have a good evening. Goodbye.